If someone translates this letter, I'll give away my fortune, as mocked the director, and the cleaner silenced him. Nancy Johnson took a deep breath as she pushed the cleaning cart down the hallway of Wilson & Associates Construction. At 55, this routine of scrubbing floors and cleaning corporate bathrooms had become her only source of income after her life completely fell apart 3 years ago. That's when she heard the laughter echoing from the boardroom. The executive director, Richard Wilson, was holding up a letter with strange letters while loudly mocking for all present to hear his arrogant bet. If anyone in this company can translate this Russian letter, I'll give away my entire fortune, declared Richard, provoking even louder laughter from the executives around the meeting table. Nancy stopped scrubbing the marble floor and discreetly lifted her eyes. Through the slightly open door, she could see the document Richard was waving in the air like a trophy. The Cyrillic letters jumped out at her like familiar words from a past she tried to forget every day. I bet even our translation team couldn't decipher this, Richard continued, raising his voice. I got it from a Russian investor who wants to do business with us. Must be some crazy proposal that's not even worth spending money to translate. The laughter grew louder when the financial manager, Michael Johnson, suggested using some translation app on his phone. Richard refused, saying it was too serious for tech gimmicks. Nancy felt her heart race. She knew those letters better than she knew her own name. For years, they had been her life, her passion, her identity. Now they were just a painful reminder of everything she had lost. You know I'm a man of my word, Richard went on, slapping the letter on the table. Whoever can translate this correctly gets everything I own. House, cars, company shares, everything. Nancy dropped the mop and timidly approached the door. Her footsteps echoed in the quiet hallway, and soon all eyes turned to her. Richard stopped talking and stared at her with a mocking expression. Well, the cleaner wants something? He asked, prompting muffled laughter from the others. Mr. Richard, Nancy said in a shaky voice, still holding the yellow gloves in her hands, I'd like to see that letter. Silence filled the room for a few seconds before erupting into laughter. Richard rose from his black leather chair, still chuckling, and walked toward her. You want to see the letter? He repeated, feigning surprise. Nancy, sweetheart, this is Russian. It's not a fudge recipe. I know it's Russian, sir, she replied, keeping her voice steady despite her nerves. That's why I'd like to see it. Richard glanced at the other executives who were watching the scene as if it were a show. His personal assistant, Amanda, had stopped typing and was now fully focused on the conversation. All right, Richard said, still laughing. Since you insist, I'll let you take a look. But when you can't understand a thing, go back to your work without wasting time. Deal? Nancy nodded and reached out to take the document. Her yellow gloves contrasted with the crisp white paper Richard handed over with an ironic smile. She examined the letterhead for a few seconds, feeling the familiar words awaken memories she had tried to bury for years. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. So? Richard taunted, crossing his arms. Figured anything out? Nancy took a deep breath and began reading aloud, pronouncing each Russian word with such perfection that the smile vanished from Richard's face instantly. Dear Mr. Richard Wilson, I write on behalf of the Sokolov Corporation to present our formal proposal for the acquisition of Wilson & Associates Construction for the sum of $400 million. The room fell into absolute silence. Michael Johnson dropped the pen he was holding, and Amanda stopped breathing for a few seconds. Richard tried to snatch the letter from Nancy's hands, but she took a step back and continued translating. Our preliminary investigation into your company revealed interesting fiscal irregularities that caught our attention. Specifically, the undeclared transactions of approximately $20 million between January and March of this year. Stop! Richard shouted, his face red with anger. That can't be written there. But it is, sir, Nancy replied calmly, turning the page. Would you like me to continue? The executives present began exchanging nervous glances. Michael Johnson stood up from his chair, clearly uncomfortable, while two other managers whispered among themselves. Richard realized he had lost control of the situation and tried to regain authority. "You're making these words up," he accused. "No one here speaks Russian to confirm what you're saying." Nancy smiled for the first time in a long while. It was a sad smile, weighed down by years of humiliation and scorn, but also by an inner strength she had forgotten she possessed. "You promised your estate to whoever translated this letter," she reminded him. "There were witnesses, and Mrs. Amanda has been recording everything on her phone since I started speaking." All eyes turned to Amanda, who confirmed with a nod. She had started recording instinctively, sensing this moment would be important. Richard tried to protest, but Nancy had already resumed reading. "The offshore accounts under the names of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands contain amounts that exactly match the unpaid taxes in United States territory. We have attached bank statements as proof of our seriousness." "How do you know Russian?" Michael interrupted, his voice strained with nervousness. Nancy stopped reading and looked at him with a mix of sadness and determination. The time had come to tell a story she had kept to herself all those years of silence. "I was a university professor of Russian literature for 15 years, she said, her voice heavy with emotion. "I have a PhD from Columbia University and a master's from Moscow University. I spoke 5 languages and gave lectures at international conferences." The silence in the room was deafening. Richard was pale, trying to process what he had just heard. The other executives looked as if they had seen a ghost. "Then why do you work as a cleaner?" Amanda asked, genuinely curious. Nancy closed her eyes for a moment, gathering strength to relive the painful past. When she opened them again, there were tears, but also an ironclad determination. "My husband, Anthony, fell ill with a brain tumor 4 years ago," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion. "The treatments cost a fortune. We sold our house, our car, spent all our savings. When the insurance plans started denying procedures, I used my academic credentials as collateral for loans." "And what happened?" Michael asked, now clearly interested in the story. "Anthony passed away 3 years ago," Nancy continued, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "I was left with debts of over $200,000. I lost my home, my furniture, even my books were repossessed. The university couldn't rehire me because I had missed too much time caring for him in his final months." Richard tried to interrupt, but Nancy raised her hand, asking for silence. There was more to the story, and she was determined to see it through. "I tried working as a freelance translator, but the competition is brutal and payments take months," she continued. "A friend recommended this cleaning job to me. She said it was temporary, just until I got back on my feet. That was 3 years ago." "And you never tried to return to academia?" asked Amanda, clearly moved by the story. "I did," Nancy replied with a bitter smile. "I sent my resume to dozens of universities, private schools, language institutes, but 3 years of inactivity in academia is like an eternity. Besides, no one wants to hire a 55-year-old professor when they can pay half the salary to a recent graduate." Richard, who had stayed quiet throughout the explanation, finally found his voice again. "All right, you have a sad story," he said, trying to regain his initial arrogance. "But that doesn't change the fact that you could be making up this translation. How do we know you're reading what's actually written?" Nancy opened the worn-out bag she carried with her and pulled out a yellowed, folded diploma. She carefully unfolded it and showed the official document from Columbia University. "Dr. Nancy Johnson Smith, PhD in Slavic literature with a specialization in commercial and legal translation," she read aloud. "Date of completion, December 2008. Michael Johnson took the diploma and examined it closely. It was real, with all the official stamps and signatures. He passed the document to the others, who confirmed its authenticity. "And there's more," Nancy said, pulling another paper from her bag. "A Russian proficiency certificate issued by the Russian Embassy in Washington, D.C., valid for legal and commercial translations." Richard was visibly nervous now. The situation had spiraled completely out of his control, and he was beginning to grasp the implications of what he had promised in front of so many witnesses. "Look, Nancy," he tried in a more conciliatory tone, "maybe we can reach an agreement. How about I give you a better position here at the company, administrative assistant with a good salary? You promised your fortune. she interrupted firmly, "in front of all these employees, and I haven't finished translating the letter yet." She resumed reading, and with every word spoken, Richard grew paler. "We are also aware of the company Wilson Holdings, registered in your name in the British Virgin Islands, which has received transfers totaling $15 million over the last 18 months. These amounts correspond exactly to the overpriced contracts with New York City Hall." "That's impossible," Richard exploded. "How would a Russian investor know details about my company?" Nancy smiled again, but this time there was something more behind that smile, something Richard couldn't decipher. "Maybe because it's not exactly an unknown investor," she said mysteriously. "What do you mean by that?" Michael asked. "The letter is signed by Dr. Viktor Sokolov," Nancy explained. "He was my thesis advisor in Moscow, one of the most brilliant international law attorneys I've ever known." The impact of the revelation echoed through the room like a bomb. Richard slumped heavily into his chair, beginning to understand he had fallen victim to a far more elaborate scheme than he had imagined. "Are you saying this was all a setup?" he asked weakly. "Not exactly," Nancy replied. "Viktor really does represent a Russian corporation interested in investing in the United States, but when he found out where I was working and under what conditions, he decided to include some extra information in his proposal." "How did he find out where you work?" asked Amanda. "6 months ago I got a call from him," explained Nancy. "He said he was coming to the United States on business and wanted to meet me. He got my number through a mutual friend from Columbia University. When he found out about my situation, he was outraged." Richard was starting to grasp the scale of the trouble he was in. This wasn't just about translating a letter. It was about a carefully orchestrated plan by someone who knew both the company's illegal dealings and Nancy's personal situation. "He investigated our company," murmured Richard, more to himself than to the others. "Viktor has contacts in international law firms," confirmed Nancy. "When he decided to invest in the American construction industry, he naturally looked into the major players in the market. Uncovering Wilson and Associates' irregularities was just a matter of time and resources." Michael Johnson abruptly stood up from his chair, visibly nervous. "Richard, we need to talk in private," he said urgently. "This could bankrupt us." "There's no private discussion now," Nancy cut in firmly. "The letter isn't finished yet, and you promised to hear me out to the end." She kept reading, revealing even more damning details about corruption schemes, fraudulent contracts, and tax evasion. With every paragraph, more executives quietly slipped out of the room, fearing the legal consequences of what they were hearing. "Our final offer is simple. We propose $400 million for the company, a fair value considering its growth potential once all pending tax issues are resolved. In return, we expect our senior consultant, Dr. Nancy Johnson Smith, to oversee the transition." "Wait a minute," Richard interrupted, still trying to process it. "You're his senior consultant." "Viktor offered me the position 3 months ago," Nancy explained calmly. "He said that regardless of the deal with this company, he wanted to help me rebuild my career. I refused because I didn't want charity." "And now?" Amanda asked, fascinated by the twist. "Now I've changed my mind," Nancy replied with determination. "These 3 years cleaning floors while overhearing conversations about tax evasion, corruption, and disrespect for employees made me realize some situations call for justice, not charity." Richard made one last desperate move. "Nancy, let's drop this whole charade," he said, trying to sound authoritative. "You want money? I'll give you a big raise. Want a better position? I'll promote you. But forget this nonsense about the company." "You promised," she repeated relentlessly, "in front of witnesses." And Amanda recorded everything. Amanda nodded again, showing her phone still recording. Other employees had started gathering near the room, drawn by rumors of what was happening. "Besides," Nancy continued, "there's one last part of the letter you'll want to hear." She turned to the final page and kept translating. "We inform you that a copy of this letter, along with all supporting documents mentioned, has been simultaneously sent to the Federal Prosecutor's Office, the Internal Revenue Service, and the State Court of Audit. We consider this transparency essential to demonstrate our seriousness and integrity as future owners of the company." The silence that followed was absolute. Richard was white as a sheet, and Michael had sat back down, running his hands through his hair in despair. "You're screwed," Amanda murmured, still processing the implications. "Not necessarily," Nancy said, carefully folding the letter. "Victor is a reasonable man. He knows that financial crimes can be fixed with settlements and fines. What he won't tolerate is disrespect toward qualified people." "What do you mean?" asked Richard with a shaky voice. "I mean you have a chance to get out of this situation without major losses," explained Nancy. "Victor is willing to buy the company at its real market value, which is about 200 million. Executives who cooperate with settling the tax issues can keep their jobs. Those who try to hide information or sabotage the process..." She let the sentence hang, allowing each of them to imagine the consequences. "And you?" asked Michael Johnson. "What do you get out of all this?" "Justice," Nancy replied simply. "For 3 years, I cleaned this room while you all discussed how to evade taxes that should have been invested in hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. I heard conversations about paying minimum wages to skilled employees while diverting millions to offshore accounts. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. "Were you spying on us?" Richard accused. "I was working," Nancy corrected. "You were the ones talking about crimes in front of an employee, assuming I was too ignorant to understand. Worse, assuming I was invisible." The truth of those words hit Richard like a punch to the gut. He vaguely remembered dozens of incriminating conversations held in Nancy's presence, treating her like a piece of furniture. "For 3 years," she continued, "I wrote down dates, amounts, names of shell companies, offshore account numbers, everything in a notebook I kept in my bag. You never paid enough attention to notice I was paying attention to everything." She opened her bag again and pulled out a worn notebook, filled with notes in multiple languages. The pages were packed with detailed information about the company's operations. "My God," whispered Michael Johnson. "You have proof of everything?" "Almost everything," Nancy confirmed. "And when I sent this information to Victor, he cross-referenced it with bank records his investigators had obtained legally." Richard finally understood he was completely defeated. There was no denying the evidence, no going back on his promise, and no avoiding the legal consequences looming ahead. "What do you want?" he asked, resigned. "I want you to honor your promise," Nancy replied. "You pledged your assets to whoever translated the letter. I translated it, in front of witnesses." "You really want me to give up everything I have?" Richard questioned, still searching for a way out. "No," Nancy said, surprising everyone. "I want you to understand what it means to lose everything you've built in life. I want you to feel the same despair I felt when I had to sell even my books to pay off my husband's debts." She paused, letting the words echo through the room. "But I don't want your complete ruin," she continued. "Victor authorized me to make a counteroffer." "What kind of counteroffer?" Richard asked, clinging to any hope. "The company will be sold for 200 million, Nancy explained. You'll keep 10% of that as compensation for your years of work. The rest will be used to settle all tax debts, compensate employees who were hurt by low wages, and establish an education fund for employees' children." "And you?" asked Amanda. "What do you get out of this?" "A fresh start," Nancy replied with a genuine smile. "Victor offered me the position of Human Resources Director at the new company with an executive salary and profit sharing. More importantly, he wants to implement an employee educational advancement program." "What kind of program?" asked Michael Johnson, genuinely interested. "Employees with underutilized higher education will receive growth opportunities within the company," explained Nancy. "Those who want to study will receive scholarships, and no one will be judged by their current position, but by the potential they can develop." The proposal was revolutionary for a company that had always treated its employees as disposable resources. Several other employees who had gathered near the room began murmuring among themselves, clearly intrigued by the upcoming changes. "And if I refuse?" asked Richard, still trying to maintain some bargaining power. "Then Victor will acquire the company through a legal process that could take 2 years," Nancy replied calmly. During that time, the Federal Prosecutor's Office investigations will proceed as usual. You may end up losing far more than the 90% you're losing now. Richard looked around the room, searching for support in the faces of the remaining executives. He found only expressions of fear and resignation. Everyone knew the evidence against them was undeniable. "I accept," he finally said, his voice barely audible. Amanda stopped the recording on her phone and looked at Nancy with admiration. "How did you manage to plan all this?" she asked. "I didn't plan it," Nancy answered honestly. "I just seized an opportunity that arose. When Victor mentioned his interest in American companies in the sector, I told him where I worked. The rest was a natural consequence of Mr. Richards' arrogance." "Did you know he would make that bet?" Amanda pressed. "I knew he looked down on all of us," Nancy replied. "For 3 years I saw how he treated skilled employees as if they were disposable. It was only a matter of time before his arrogance created a situation like this." Richard slowly rose from his chair, looking as though he'd aged 10 years in an hour. "When will all this happen?" he asked. "Victor is arriving in the United States next week," Nancy informed him. "The transfer documents are already being prepared by his law firm in New York City. If all goes well, the transition could be complete in 60 days. "What about the other employees?" Michael asked. "What will happen to us?" "That depends on you," Nancy answered. "Those who cooperate with resolving pending issues and demonstrate a willingness to work within the law will be retained. Anyone who tries to hide information or sabotage the process will be terminated and may face criminal charges." The brutal honesty of her response made several executives exchange nervous glances. Some began mentally calculating what crimes they'd committed and how they could cooperate to minimize the consequences. "Nancy," Amanda said suddenly, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How did you keep your dignity all these years?" she asked. "I saw how people treated you, and you never reacted, never complained." Nancy smiled sadly and tucked her notebook back into her bag. "Losing everything you've built in life teaches you some hard lessons," she replied. "One of them is that dignity doesn't come from your job title or your salary. It comes from knowing who you are inside." "And another lesson?" Amanda asked, clearly moved by her answer. "That life can change completely overnight," Nancy said. "For worse or for better. The secret is being ready to seize opportunities when they come." Richard, who had remained silent during the conversation, finally found the courage to ask a question that had been tormenting him. "Nancy, why didn't you reveal your background before?" he asked. "If I had known you were a doctor, would you have treated me differently?" she interrupted. "Or would you have just found another way to humiliate me?" The question went unanswered because everyone knew the truth. Richard had mistreated every employee he considered beneath him, regardless of their education or competence. "For 3 years," Nancy continued, "I tried to convince myself it was just a temporary job, that I'd soon find something better and leave this place behind. But the truth is, I needed this job to survive." "And now?" asked Michael Johnson. "How do you feel about all this change?" "Scared," Nancy admitted. "Spending 3 years cleaning floors after teaching at universities leaves anyone unsure of their abilities, but also determined to prove I can still contribute more than just manual labor." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Mitchell, the company's lawyer, who had been urgently summoned by Richard. He entered the room clearly worried, carrying a folder full of documents. "Richard, what's going on here?" he asked, looking around the room. "I got your call saying it was urgent. Mitchell, I need you to tell me something," Richard said, ignoring the question. "If I publicly promise to hand over my assets to someone in front of witnesses, is that legally binding?" Dr. Mitchell seemed confused but answered professionally. "It depends on the circumstances," he said. "If it was a serious promise, made in front of witnesses with clear conditions, it could indeed be considered a valid verbal contract. Even if the promise was made sarcastically or mockingly," Richard pressed. "The intent behind the promise could be challenged in court," the lawyer admitted. "But if the person fulfilled the stated conditions and there are witnesses and recordings, it's hard to argue it wasn't serious." Amanda showed her phone to Dr. Mitchell, confirming everything had been recorded. The lawyer listened to parts of the recording, and his expression grew increasingly grave. "Richard, what have you done?" he asked, clearly alarmed. "I made the mistake of underestimating an employee," Richard replied bitterly. Dr. Mitchell turned to Nancy, who still held the Russian letter in her hands. "Did you really translate this document?" he asked. "Completely," Nancy confirmed. "And I can provide my academic certificates as proof of qualification." "And the letter's contents are true," the lawyer continued. "As far as the Russian investigations could determine," she replied diplomatically. "Doctor." Mitchell took the letter and examined the Cyrillic text, clearly lost in the unfamiliar characters. "I assume you have a written copy of the translation?" he asked. "I can prepare one," Nancy said. "But first, I'd like to clarify that I'm not interested in harming anyone unnecessarily. I just want justice." "What kind of justice?" the lawyer questioned. "We want to settle the company's outstanding issues and provide real growth opportunities for all employees," Nancy explained. "The Russian investors are willing to buy the company at a fair price and retain most jobs." Dr. Mitchell turned to Richard with a mix of disbelief and resignation. "Richard, do you understand you could lose control of the company?" he asked. "I already do," Richard replied wearily. "The question now is minimizing the damage." "And what about the criminal charges?" the lawyer insisted. "If what this letter claims is true, you could face serious charges. The investors are willing to cooperate with agreements involving restitution of the withheld amounts and the implementation of transparent practices," explained Nancy. "They don't want to destroy the company, they want to reform it." Dr. Mitchell seemed slightly relieved by this information. "And what about Richard's personal assets?" he asked. "Does this promise really need to be kept?" "We've modified the terms," said Nancy. "He'll keep 10% of the company's sale value. That's more than many employees got when they were fired without notice over the years." The relative generosity of the proposal surprised Dr. Mitchell, who had expected a much worse situation when he entered the room. "Why are you being so reasonable?" he asked. "Because destroying lives doesn't solve problems," replied Nancy. "Reforming systems and creating opportunities does." Richard, who had remained silent during the legal discussion, finally spoke again. "Nancy, can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course." "Do you hate me?" he asked simply. The question caught everyone off guard. Nancy fell silent for a few moments, clearly reflecting on her answer. "No," she finally said. "You deeply disappointed me. You humiliated me countless times. You wasted my knowledge and experience for 3 years, but I don't hate you." "Why?" Richard insisted. "Because hate is a waste of energy," she replied. "And I've already wasted too much energy feeling bad about things I can't change. I'd rather invest my energy in things I can improve." The answer visibly moved Richard. For the first time in years, he was being confronted with the consequences of his actions by someone who had every reason to seek revenge, but chose the path of rebuilding instead. "I regret it," he said quietly. "How I treated you and all the other employees." "Regret is the first step toward change," replied Nancy. "But it's actions that show whether the change is real." Dr. Mitchell, seizing the moment of reconciliation, suggested they begin discussing the practical details of the transition. "When do the Russian investors want to finalize the deal?" he asked. "Victor will arrive next week," Nancy informed him. "But he already has a team of American lawyers preparing all the necessary documentation." "And the employees?" asked Amanda. "When will we know about our jobs?" "Everyone will receive an individual evaluation during the first month under the new management," explained Nancy. "The focus will be on skills and potential, not current position or tenure." "Does that mean I could have growth opportunities?" Amanda asked hopefully. "If you're willing to study and develop yourself, yes," Nancy confirmed. "The new company will invest heavily in education and training." The prospect of positive changes began to generate excitement among the employees present. For the first time in years, they saw real possibilities for professional growth. "What about salaries?" asked Michael Johnson, still concerned about practical matters. "They'll be revised to reflect each employee's actual qualifications," Nancy replied. "Those who were undervalued will receive adjustments, Those who were earning more than they contributed will have to prove their worth. The prospect of fair wages was another positive point for most employees who had long resented the privileges granted only to executives. "Nancy," Richard said suddenly, "can I ask a favor?" "What is it?" "When you take over as head of human resources, can you give me a chance to prove I can change?" he asked humbly. "Not as an executive, but as an ordinary employee." The question surprised everyone in the room. Richard was asking to be demoted in his own company, a show of humility no one expected from him. "That will depend on your actions in the coming weeks," Nancy replied diplomatically. "If you genuinely cooperate with the transition and demonstrate a commitment to transparency, we can discuss a role in the new structure." "I'll do whatever it takes," Richard promised. "I want to make up for the mistakes I've made." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. Dr. Mitchell seized the moment to raise an important practical issue. "Nancy, you'll need legal support during this transition," he said. "I can offer my services to ensure everything is done by the book." "I appreciate the offer," she replied. "But Victor already has a legal team specialized in international acquisitions. They'll work alongside American lawyers to ensure full legal compliance." "What about labor issues?" he asked. "Changes in ownership can create specific obligations." "All labor rights will be respected," Nancy assured. "In fact, the new owners want to go beyond legal requirements and establish benefits that make the company a model of best practices." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more employees who had heard rumors about the impending changes. Soon, the room was packed with people anxious for information about their futures at the company. Nancy stood and called for everyone's attention. "I know you're all worried about what's going to happen," she said, addressing the group. "I'll explain the situation to everyone." She briefly outlined the acquisition proposal, the changes to be implemented, and the opportunities that would open up for employees. With every word, the group's enthusiasm grew visibly. "Does this mean we'll finally have real chances to grow here?" asked Mary, a secretary who had worked at the company for 10 years. "It means your skills will be recognized and developed," Nancy confirmed. "If you have qualifications that aren't being used, you'll have the chance to showcase them." "What about courses and training?" asked Charles, an accounting technician who had always wanted to specialize. "The new company will establish partnerships with universities and educational institutes," Nancy explained. "Employees who want to study will receive financial support and flexible hours." Questions kept coming, and Nancy answered each one with patience and enthusiasm. It was clear she had already thought carefully about how to implement the changes fairly and efficiently. "One last thing," she said as the questions began to slow. "Over the next few weeks, there will be many discussions about past irregularities. I want to make it clear that employees who were forced to participate in questionable practices won't be punished if they cooperate with the regularization." This assurance brought visible relief to many faces in the group. Several employees had been pressured into illegal schemes against their will, fearing they'd lose their jobs if they refused. "How do we know we can trust this?" asked Joseph, a construction foreman who had always resented being pressured to overcharge for materials. "Because now you have a voice in management," Nancy replied, "and because the new owners understand that coerced employees are victims, not accomplices." The impromptu meeting continued for another hour, with Nancy answering questions and explaining the details of the transition process. When people finally began to disperse, she felt exhausted, but also energized. "Nancy," said Amanda, approaching her as the room began to empty, "can I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "How did you manage to hold on to hope during all those difficult years?" she asked. "I know there must have been times when you thought about giving up on everything." Nancy smiled and looked out the window of the meeting room, watching the city's movement below. "There were moments, yes," she admitted, "especially in the first few months after Anthony passed away. I'd wake up every morning feeling like I had no purpose left in life." "What changed?" Amanda pressed. "I realized I was using the pain of loss as an excuse to stop fighting," Nancy explained. "Anthony always told me I had too much talent to waste. When I started working here, I promised myself I wouldn't let circumstances define who I was. Did it work? Amanda asked. Not always, Nancy answered honestly. There were days I cried in the company bathroom feeling sorry for myself, but there were also days I felt grateful for having a job, for being able to pay my bills, for being alive and healthy. And now? How do you feel about everything that's happening? Terrified, Nancy admitted. It's an enormous responsibility, but also excited. For the first time in years, I feel like I can make a real difference in people's lives. Richard, who had remained silent during the entire conversation with the employees, finally approached the two. Nancy, can I speak with you privately? He asked. Amanda discreetly stepped away, leaving the two alone in the now empty room. I wanted to apologize, Richard said, his voice thick with emotion. Truly, not just for the humiliations you endured, but for all the years I wasted your talent. Thank you for saying that, Nancy replied. It means a lot to hear a sincere apology. Can I ask you something? Richard continued. Did you plan all of this as revenge? No, she answered firmly. Revenge would have been exposing you to the media and watching the company collapse. What I did was take an opportunity to create something better. Something better for you? Or for everyone? Richard asked. For everyone, Nancy said without hesitation, including you if you're truly willing to change. Richard fell silent for a moment, processing the generosity in her response. Why are you giving me a second chance? He finally asked. Because everyone deserves the opportunity to grow, Nancy replied. You made serious mistakes, but that doesn't mean you can't learn and become a better person. What if I disappoint you again? Richard questioned. Then you'll lose the chance to be part of the new company, she said simply. But I hope that won't happen. The conversation was interrupted by Dr. Mitchell's arrival, carrying preliminary documents for the transition. Nancy, I got a call from the Russian investors' lawyers, he said. They want to schedule a meeting for next Tuesday to begin the legal proceedings. Perfect, she replied. I'll be prepared. They also mentioned they want a full evaluation of all the company's assets, the lawyer continued. That will include a detailed financial audit. Richard seemed nervous at this. They'll find out everything, won't they? He murmured. Most likely, Dr. Mitchell confirmed. That's why it's important for you both to be completely transparent from the start. Any attempt to hide information will only make things worse. I'll cooperate fully, Richard promised. I don't want any more complications. Nancy watched the shift in Richard's behavior with a mix of skepticism and hope. Could 3 hours of facing reality really change a man who spent years being arrogant and disrespectful? Richard, she said, if you're truly willing to change, you'll need to prove it with actions, not just words. What do you suggest? He asked. Start by personally apologizing to every employee you've humiliated over the years, she replied, and not generic apologies, specific ones, acknowledging what you did wrong to each person. That'll be hard, Richard admitted. Some employees have every right to hate me. If it were easy, it wouldn't be real change, Nancy answered. True transformation always requires humility and effort. Dr. Mitchell took the pause in the conversation to raise another important point. Nancy, you'll need support during your first few weeks as director, he said. I recommend assembling a trusted team quickly. I already have a few people in mind, she replied. Employees who've always shown competence and integrity, but never had growth opportunities. Like Amanda, Richard suggested. She's always been an excellent secretary, but I never promoted her because... He trailed off, realizing he was about to admit another act of discrimination. Because she's a young woman and you didn't think she deserved more responsibility, Nancy finished. Exactly, Richard admitted, ashamed. That was unfair. Amanda will be one of the first people I talk to about a promotion, Nancy said. She has administrative skills, knows the company well, and showed real character throughout this situation. The afternoon was winding down when Viktor Sokolov called Nancy's phone. She'd given him the number as an emergency contact in case issues arose with the negotiation. Victor, she answered in Russian, how are things in New York City? Everything's proceeding as planned, he replied in the same language, but I've heard interesting rumors about what happened at your company today. What do you mean? Nancy asked, intrigued. Our American lawyers got a call from Dr. Mitchell reporting that the CEO had made a public promise regarding the translation of our letter, Victor explained, clearly amused. Is it true you got a recorded confession of the company's crimes? It's a long story, Nancy said, laughing. But yes, Richard made exactly the kind of arrogant display you predicted he would. And how did he react when you translated the letter? Victor asked. Like a man who just realized he completely underestimated the situation, Nancy replied. But he's willing to cooperate with the transition. Excellent, Victor said. That'll make the legal process much smoother. We'll face less internal resistance implementing reforms. Victor, can I ask you something? Nancy said. Why did you bother investigating this particular company? There are so many others in the market. Because when a brilliant former student tells me she's working as a janitor despite having a PhD, I get curious about the kind of company that wastes talent like that, he answered. And companies that waste talent usually have other serious problems. And you were right, Nancy admitted. Unfortunately, yes, Victor said. But now we have the chance to turn a troubled company into a model of good practices. It'll be an interesting project. Are you still sure you want me as HR director? Nancy asked, a hint of uncertainty in her voice. 3 years away from the corporate world is a long time. Nancy, you just orchestrated the acquisition of a multi-million-dollar company using nothing but intelligence and perfect timing, Victor said, laughing. I'd say your executive skills are intact. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Victor explaining the details of the next steps in the process. When she finally hung up, Richard and Dr. Mitchell were watching her curiously. Is he satisfied with how things have developed? Asked Dr. Mitchell. More than satisfied, replied Nancy. He said your voluntary cooperation will significantly speed up the regularization process. What about the criminal charges? Richard asked nervously. Victor confirmed that if there's full transparency and repayment of the evaded amounts, he'll use his influence to negotiate settlements that avoid prison time, Nancy explained. The focus is on restitution, not punishment. Richard seemed relieved but still worried. What if I can't repay everything? He asked. Some of the offshore accounts were frozen by the banks when the investigation started. Then you'll hand over all the documents and passwords so the lawyers can try to recover the funds legally, Nancy replied. The important thing is to demonstrate good faith and full cooperation. Dr. Mitchell took the opportunity to clarify some legal points. Richard, you understand you'll need to renounce any claim to the recovered funds, right? He asked. And that you may have to pay substantial fines on top of the restitution? I understand, Richard answered. At this point, I'm more concerned about avoiding prison than holding on to money that was never rightfully mine. The honesty of his response impressed Nancy. Maybe Richard was truly willing to change, not just out of fear of consequences, but from genuine remorse. Richard, she said, if you show that same honesty throughout this process, you'll have a real chance to rebuild your life and your reputation. Do you really believe that's possible? He asked. After everything I've done? I believe anyone can change if they're genuinely willing to put in the effort, Nancy replied. The question is whether you're willing to make that effort. I am, Richard said firmly. I want to make up for the harm I've caused, and I want to become someone my family can respect again. The mention of family brought a more personal dimension to the conversation. Richard was married and had 2 teenage children who would undoubtedly be affected by the changes in his life. How did your wife react when you told her what happened? Nancy asked. I haven't told her yet, Richard admitted. I don't know how to explain that I lost the company because of a stupid gamble. Honesty is always the best path, Nancy advised. And maybe it would help to explain that you didn't so much lose the company as gain the chance to become a better person. Dr. Mitchell checked his watch and realized it was already the end of the workday. I suggest we schedule a meeting for tomorrow morning, he said. We have a lot of practical details to sort out before the investors arrive. Good idea, Nancy agreed. And Richard, I suggest you use tonight to talk to your family and think about how you want to approach apologizing to the employees. Nancy, Richard said before they stood to leave. Thank you. For what? She asked, surprised. For giving me a chance to redeem myself, he replied. You could have destroyed me completely today, but you chose to give me an opportunity to grow. Everyone deserves a second chance, Nancy said simply. What you do with it is up to you. By the time they finally left the meeting room, it was already dark outside. Nancy gathered her cleaning supplies, realizing this might be the last time she'd use them professionally. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd started the day as a janitor and was ending it as a future CEO. Amanda found her in the hallway, still processing everything that had happened. "Nancy, can I give you a ride home?" she offered. "I think you must be exhausted." "Thank you, but I'll take the bus," Nancy replied. "I need some time to process all this." "I understand," Amanda said, "but before you go, I wanted to tell you something." "What is it?" "You inspired me today," Amanda said emotionally. "Seeing how you kept your dignity all these years, and how you used your skills to create something positive instead of just seeking revenge, it made me realize I need to fight harder for my dreams too." "What dreams?" Nancy asked, genuinely interested. "I've always wanted to study law," Amanda admitted, "but I never had the courage to start, thinking it was too late or that I wasn't good enough." "It's never too late to start over," Nancy said, "and the new company will encourage employees to study. Maybe this is the perfect opportunity." "Do you really think so?" Amanda asked hopefully. "I'm sure of it," Nancy confirmed, "and when you graduate, I want you working in the company's legal department." The promise left Amanda visibly moved. For the first time in years, she glimpsed a professional future that matched her dreams and ambitions. "Nancy," Amanda said, "can I ask you one more thing?" "Of course." "How did you manage to forgive so quickly?" she asked. "If it were me, I think I'd still be angry." Nancy smiled sadly and adjusted her bag on her shoulder. "I didn't forgive quickly," she admitted. "I spent 3 years holding on to bitterness and resentment. But today I realized those feelings were hurting me more than anyone else. What changed? I realized I had the power to transform the situation," Nancy explained, "and that using that power to destroy would be wasting it. I chose to use it to build something better instead." The two said goodbye in the company parking lot, each heading home with thoughts very different from what they'd had that morning. For Amanda, it was an evening of renewed dreams and endless possibilities. For Nancy, it was a night of reflection on immense responsibilities and unprecedented challenges. On the bus home, Nancy looked out the window at the city passing by and thought of Anthony. He had always said she was too strong to be defeated by circumstances, and that one day her strength would be recognized. Maybe he had been right after all. The small apartment she shared with a co-worker had never felt so welcoming. Nancy made a simple cup of tea and sat at the kitchen table to process everything that had happened. In a single day, her life had completely changed direction. The phone rang around 10 at night. It was Victor again, calling from New York City. "Sorry to call so late," he said in Russian, "but I just got out of a meeting with our American lawyers and wanted to update you on the developments." "What kind of developments?" Nancy asked. "We received additional information about the company's irregularities," Victor explained. "It seems the problem is even bigger than we initially thought." "How so?" "There are more companies involved in the scheme," Victor said. "Wilson and Associates Construction is just one piece of a larger network of tax evasion and corruption." The news left Nancy worried. She had thought they were dealing with isolated issues, not a broader conspiracy. "Does this change our plans?" she asked. "Actually, it strengthens our position," Victor replied. "The American authorities are very interested in cooperating with a foreign company that can help dismantle this network." "And Richard, did he know about the other companies?" "Most likely," Victor said. "But this also means his cooperation will be even more valuable for the investigations." Nancy processed the implications of this information. Richard would have to face not only the consequences of his own crimes, but also pressure to testify against others involved in the corruption network. "Victor, this will complicate the situation much further," she said. "Richard might become afraid to cooperate if he knows there are other powerful people involved." "That's why it's important for you to keep an open dialogue with him," advised Victor. "He needs to understand cooperation is his only chance to avoid worse consequences." "What about security?" asked Nancy, starting to see potential risks. If we're talking about a corruption network, there could be people interested in silencing witnesses. I've already thought of that, said Victor. I'll arrange discreet security for you and Richard over the next few weeks, just as a precaution. The prospect of needing protection added a new layer of seriousness to the situation. Nancy began to realize she had gotten involved in something much bigger than she had imagined. Victor, are you sure I should be part of this? She asked. I don't have experience with such complex situations. Nancy, you spent 3 years observing and documenting corporate crimes without anyone suspecting, he replied. That shows both competence and courage. You're exactly the right person to lead this transformation. The conversation continued for a few more minutes, with Victor explaining the security procedures that would be put in place and the timelines for the coming weeks. When she finally hung up, Nancy felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of the responsibility she had taken on. She spent most of the night awake, alternating between excitement and anxiety about the future. It was too radical a change to process quickly, especially after 3 years of predictable routine and low expectations. The next morning, Nancy arrived at the company earlier than usual. She wanted a few moments of silence to mentally prepare for another day of intense changes. She found Richard already in the meeting room, looking like he'd slept little. "Good morning," she said, noticing the dark circles under his eyes and his worried expression. "Good morning, Nancy," he replied. "I spoke with my wife last night. I told her everything that happened." "How did she take it?" asked Nancy, sitting at the table. "Better than I expected," Richard admitted. "She said she already suspected there were problems at the company, but didn't know the extent, and that she'd rather see me poor and honest than rich and criminal." "She's right," Nancy agreed. "And your children?" "I haven't told them yet," said Richard. "They're teenagers, and I'm worried about how they'll react to the changes in our lifestyle." "Teenagers are more resilient than we think," Nancy advised, "and maybe it's an opportunity for them to learn important values about integrity and responsibility." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Mitchell, who brought more documents and legal updates. "Good morning," he said, looking concerned. "I have some news you both need to hear." "What kind of news?" asked Nancy. "I got a call from the federal prosecutor's office," Dr. Mitchell explained. "They want to schedule a meeting with Richard for this afternoon. It seems the investigations have expanded beyond this company." Richard paled at the news. "Are they going to arrest me?" he asked in a shaky voice. "Not necessarily," the lawyer replied. "But they want you to give a statement about your connections with other companies in the sector." "What other companies?" asked Nancy, though she already suspected the answer. "Apparently there's a network of construction companies coordinating overbilling schemes in public contracts," explained Dr. Mitchell. "Wilson and Associates was at the center of this network." The revelation confirmed what Victor had shared the night before. Richard was involved in a conspiracy far larger than the isolated crimes of his company. "Richard," said Nancy firmly, "you need to cooperate fully with the authorities. It's your only chance to minimize the consequences." "But if I talk, I could be putting other people at risk," protested Richard. "Some of them are very powerful." "And if you don't talk, you'll be protecting criminals at the expense of your own family," Nancy replied. "Besides, the investigations will reach them one way or another. Your cooperation just speeds up the process." Dr. Mitchell agreed with Nancy's assessment. "Richard, you have 2 choices," he said. "Cooperate voluntarily and be treated as a cooperating witness, or wait to be indicted as a defendant and have to defend yourself against the same crimes you're trying to hide." "What about my family?" asked Richard. "If I testify against powerful people, they could be in danger." "That's why Victor has already arranged security for all of us," Nancy explained. "He understands the risks involved." The morning passed quickly with preparations for Richard's testimony. Dr. Mitchell advised him on legal procedures, while Nancy helped organize the documents and information he would need. At 2 in the afternoon, Richard left for the federal prosecutor's office accompanied by Dr. Mitchell. Nancy stayed at the company to wait for Victor, who would arrive from New York City later that evening. During the hours Richard was gone, Nancy took the opportunity to speak individually with several employees. She wanted to better understand the company's internal dynamics and identify people who could lead the coming changes. Her first conversation was with Amanda, who showed genuine enthusiasm for the planned transformations. "Nancy, can I tell you something that always bothered me here?" said Amanda. "Of course." "Several times I saw documents being altered before audits," she revealed. "I knew it was wrong, but I was afraid to speak up because I needed the job." "What kind of changes?" asked Nancy. "Mostly related to material costs and supplier payments," Amanda explained. "The actual amounts were always higher than what appeared in the official reports." "Do you still have those original documents?" Nancy asked hopefully. "Some," admitted Amanda. "I made copies for my own protection in case I needed them later." "Those copies will be very valuable for the investigations," said Nancy, "and to show that you were coerced into participating, not a willing accomplice." The conversation with Amanda revealed a pattern that repeated throughout the day. Several employees had been forced to participate in questionable activities, but few had dared to speak up for fear of retaliation. Michael Johnson was another employee who approached Nancy that afternoon. "I need to tell you about the overbilling schemes," he said nervously. "I was forced to sign false documents multiple times." "Do you have proof of this?" asked Nancy. "I have emails from Richard instructing me to alter spreadsheets," Michael confirmed, "and records of the pressure I was under to comply." "Why didn't you report it before?" Nancy questioned. "Because he threatened to fire me and ruin my reputation in the industry if I didn't cooperate," Michael explained. "I have a family to support. I couldn't risk losing my job." Each conversation revealed more details about the toxic culture that had dominated the company for years. Competent and honest employees had been coerced into participating in crimes out of fear of losing their jobs, while those who refused were systematically marginalized. Victor arrived at 5 in the afternoon, accompanied by 2 American lawyers and a forensic accountant. Nancy greeted him at the entrance of the company, noticing how his presence immediately changed the atmosphere of the place. "Nancy," he said in English, embracing her warmly, "you're even more determined than I remembered." "The circumstances demand determination," she replied also in English so the others could understand. "These are Doctors Taylor and Anderson, our American lawyers," Victor introduced. "And this is the accountant Peterson, who will handle the financial audit." The greetings were formal but cordial. It was evident Victor had chosen professionals experienced in complex corporate investigations. "Where is Mr. Richard?" asked Dr. Taylor. "Giving testimony at the federal prosecutor's office," Nancy informed. "He should return soon." "Excellent," said Dr. Taylor. "That demonstrates proactive cooperation, which will be very favorable for negotiations." They moved to the meeting room, where Nancy had prepared all available documents about the company. Victor examined the materials with professional interest, asking technical questions about operations and finances. "Nancy, you've done impressive work documenting everything," he said, after reviewing her notebook. "This will significantly speed up our audit." "I had 3 years to observe and take notes," she replied modestly. "But most people wouldn't have recognized the importance of this information," Victor insisted. "You have a natural instinct for financial investigations." The accountant Peterson was particularly interested in the details about suspicious bank transactions. "With these preliminary details, I can focus the audit on the most critical points," he said. "This could reduce the timeline from 2 months to 2 weeks. "What about the legal aspects?" Nancy asked. "It largely depends on the extent of cooperation from those involved," replied Dr. Anderson. "If everyone cooperates voluntarily, we can negotiate agreements to avoid prolonged criminal proceedings." Richard returned around 7 in the evening, looking exhausted but slightly relieved. Dr. Mitchell accompanied him, carrying a folder full of new documents. "How did it go?" Nancy asked as soon as they entered the room. "Better than I expected," Richard replied. The prosecutor was professional and seemed primarily interested in gathering information about the broader network. "Did you tell them everything?" Nancy pressed. "Everything I know," Richard confirmed. "Names, companies, amounts, timelines. They already had a lot of information. They just wanted confirmation and additional details." Dr. Mitchell addressed Victor's lawyers. "The federal prosecutor's office confirmed they will treat Richard as a cooperating witness," he informed. "In exchange for full cooperation, he will receive immunity from criminal prosecution, though he'll still have to pay fines and restitution." "Excellent," said Dr. Taylor. That eliminates many legal complications for the company acquisition. Victor stood and walked over to Richard, extending his hand. Mr. Richard, I want to commend you for the courage to cooperate with the investigation, he said formally. I know it wasn't an easy decision. Thank you, Richard replied, clearly moved by the acknowledgement. I'm trying to do the right thing, even if it's late. That's exactly the attitude we want in the new company, Victor said. People who can admit mistakes and work to correct them. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, outlining detailed timelines for the transition. Victor explained that he wanted to implement the changes gradually, minimizing disruptions for employees and clients. Starting Monday, we'll begin individual evaluations with all employees, he announced. The goal is to identify underutilized talents and create personalized development plans. What about the employees who were directly involved in the crimes? Asked Nancy. We'll distinguish between leaders and followers, explained Victor. Those who were coerced into participating will be given opportunities for redemption. Those who led criminal activities will be dismissed, but will still receive legal support to cooperate with the investigations. The balanced approach impressed everyone present. Victor was clearly interested in justice, not revenge. One last thing, said Victor, addressing the entire group. I want everyone to understand that we're creating more than just a reformed company. We're establishing a model for how businesses can be run with integrity and social responsibility. What does that mean in practice? Asked Richard. It means fair wages, real growth opportunities, complete financial transparency, and a genuine commitment to quality and excellence, explained Victor. We want other companies to see our success and feel inspired to follow the same path. Victor's ambitious vision energized everyone in the room. For the first time in years, they glimpsed the possibility of working for a company they could genuinely be proud of. When the meeting finally ended, it was past 10 at night. Victor suggested they all go out to dinner together to celebrate the start of this new phase. Thank you for the invitation, said Nancy, but I think I'd rather go home and process everything that happened today. I completely understand, said Victor. It's been 2 intense days for you, but before you go, I want to give you this. He handed her a sealed envelope. What is it? Asked Nancy. Your contract as Human Resources Director, said Victor with a smile. Salary, benefits, responsibilities, all official. Nancy opened the envelope with trembling hands and quickly read the contents. The salary was 3 times what she had earned as a university professor, and the benefits included premium health insurance, profit sharing, and a substantial budget for employee development programs. Victor, this is more than I ever imagined, she said, her voice choked with emotion. It's exactly what you deserve, he replied. And with the results I know you'll deliver, we'll soon be discussing raises and promotions. Richard watched the scene with a mix of admiration and remorse. For 3 years, he had wasted the talent of an exceptional executive, treating her as disposable labor. Nancy, he said, can I ask one more favor? What is it? When you're settled in your new role, could you teach me how to identify and value talent in the company? He asked humbly. I've obviously made serious judgment mistakes all these years. It would be my pleasure, replied Nancy. One of the first things we'll learn together is that talent and potential can be found anywhere, in any position. Her response symbolically closed a cycle of disrespect and opened another of recognition and opportunity. For Nancy, it was the end of a 3-year journey at rock bottom and the beginning of a rise she had thought impossible. On the bus ride home, she reread the contract several times, still hardly believing the turnaround her life had taken. In 2 days, she had gone from an invisible janitor to an executive director of a reformed company. More important than the financial change was the renewed sense of purpose she felt. For the first time since Anthony's death, she had a mission that combined her skills with her passions. She could use her knowledge to create opportunities for people who, like her, had been underestimated and marginalized. The phone rang again when she got home. It was Amanda calling to ask about the results of the meeting with Victor. Nancy, how did the meeting go? She asked anxiously. Better than I ever dreamed, replied Nancy, and I have a proposal for you. What kind of proposal? Victor wants to implement a mentorship program for employees who want to grow professionally, explained Nancy. Would you like to be my assistant in this program while you study law? "Are you serious?" asked Amanda, clearly emotional. "Completely serious," confirmed Nancy. "It comes with a raise, flexible hours for studying, and valuable administrative experience." "Yes!" Amanda shouted. "Of course I accept." Amanda's joy was contagious, reminding Nancy why she had decided to use her new position to create opportunities for others. Every person she could help grow would be a victory against the system that had tried to keep her invisible. End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a sincere comment. Do you think Nancy made the right decision by giving Richard a second chance? We'd love to hear your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories.